Good morning to you all. It's a slow start to a beautiful day. Thank you for joining us for launching Harry Tzimitras and Mete Hatay's report, The Need for Realism, Solving the Cyprus Problem Through Linkage Politics. The report, published version, printed version of it has just arrived in good time. We were a little bit like the Cyprus problem itself, kept on our toes, and the printed versions just arrived. Harry will be speaking about addressing a similar situation to what happened to the report, but we're not very sure whether there's going to be a happy breakthrough. For some time, we had been hearing that the negotiations between the Cypriot president, Nikos Anastasiades, and his Turkish Cypriot counterpart, Mustafa Akıncı, were going well. And there was this exhilarating sense that finally, a breakthrough may occur in the case of unifying Cyprus, the two parts of the island. However, in recent times, some of the news that we've been picking up through the grapevine has not been very promising. And Harry has prepared for us this, what we think is a very timely report, offering us a brief but well-balanced historical background, and then addressing what has been going on with the negotiations, and it's particularly also the sticking parts of the negotiations. Harry is very cautious, and we still hope, especially the two of us, but I suspect many of you too here in the audience, still hope that a miraculous breakthrough may actually occur. However, in the meantime, Harry is offering some ideas, hopefully novel ideas, modestly novel ideas, that could be put into practice to help or to slow down the danger of the two sides drifting away from each other. And that with the help of these ideas, if they could be put into place, the prospects of a future attempt at unifying the island may still be with us. I will, of course, not plagiarize any of his ideas, but before I introduce Harry to you, I'm Kemal Kirişçi, the TÜSİAD Senior Fellow and the Director of the Turkey Project at the Center for United States and Europe here at Brookings. Harry is a good friend, a friend who's a professor of public international law and the law of the sea. He had previously been working as a professor in Istanbul, like myself. He was teaching at Bilgi University and is now with PRIO, the Peace Research Institute Oslo's office on the island. So he has his so-called finger on the pulse of the island as well as the negotiations. He has a long list of publications. I won't go through them, but more recently, in the context of the discovery of these natural gas deposits in the Eastern Mediterranean, he, with his colleagues, published a bookish report called Eastern Mediterranean Hydrocarbons and Geopolitical Perspectives, Markets and Export Routes and Prospects of Regional Cooperation. I will be giving the floor to Harry, and he will share his ideas on what the next steps could look like in a moment for about 15-20 minutes. As the discussant of Harry and Mete's report, we have Diana Shigas. She's just flown down from Boston for us. She's a professor of a very interesting topic that I was not aware of, so as an academic, so I better read it and get it right. Diana is a professor of practice of international negotiations and conflict resolution at a very prestigious school, the Fletcher School at Tufts University. She was also previously the director of a very interesting effort and organization called the Collaboration for Development Action, where she led the project, focusing on efforts to try to increase the effectiveness of peace-building projects. I found this particularly fascinating because as part of my profession as a professor of international relations, I have always been curious to try to find out is all these energetic efforts are actually delivering end products. And Diana has first-hand experience about them. From the field, she has worked with the OSCE, the Organization of Security and Cooperation in Europe, but also participated in what they call second track 2 diplomacy in Latin America, but also South Africa. She too has a long list of publications, but the one that attracted my attention was what difference has peace building made with a focus on Kosovo. Finally, as a panelist, we have Andrew Novo, who's right now an associate professor of a discipline that we're much more familiar with, strategic studies at the National Defense University. Andrew is a graduate of Princeton University as well as St. Anthony's College at Oxford from classic studies. I say chapeau, I have great respect for classic studies. If I am ever given another chance, I have promised myself that I will give it a crack. I am trying to influence my son about it, but he doesn't want to hear. He's more interested in rap music, West African rap music. Andrew has taught at the US Military Academy and previously at Harvard Business School. He too has a long list of publications, including 2 books, but the one that attracted my attention, and I promise I will buy a copy, is called Queen of Cities. And it's a historical novel on the fall of Constantinople. With those introductory remarks, I'd like to turn the floor to Harry. You're welcome to come here or speak from your chair. All right. Thanks, Harry.
Thank you. Thank you very, very much for those kind words, dear Kemal. It's wonderful being here, and many thanks to Brookings for both hosting the event and undertaking the publication of these spare thoughts.
I think you will need this, talking about Cyprus.
Possibly, thank you. In a very timely topic, perhaps an unfortunately timely topic, plagued with a lot of expectations, but at the same time, time frames that don't necessarily produce outcomes that are understood as nothing more than imposition on one of the 2 sides. I'm hoping that one day we'll be talking about this issue in the way that Andrew's novel is, but until then, we have a lot of work to do. What I was hoping to do today, in the hope that you got the report and hopefully that you'll be opening it in the time to come, was offer perhaps a few thoughts on where things stand at the moment, give you a short update on the negotiating process. Reasons for being optimistic, reasons for being less optimistic or realistic about it, and see what kind of a time frame we're looking at in the next period. If you like, to have a reality check within which we can situate the developments at the moment, but also perhaps taking a step beyond that, and this is the essence of the report, trying to think of suggestions now that will make the attainment of a solution, but more importantly, the putting into practice of whatever is decided more efficient in the near future. The negotiated solution, if you like, for the Cyprus issue has two phases, or two meanings. It has the phase of reaching it, and it has the phase of applying it the day after. And it has, if you like, also two components, one local and one international. So in this respect, the effort behind this whole process has been one that has been guided by a few parameters that I think are very pertinent at the time. One is realism, and we already call it the need for pragmatism. We really desperately need to be very pragmatic about international and, to a lesser extent, local realities. The sense of urgency, because although we talk about the non-existence, technically speaking, of time frames, we think that there is, if you like, an organic, a necessary time frame in place. Thirdly, the need to think outside the box, simply because the process going on for 40, perhaps 50 years to some, has led to some progress now, but effectively not. We need not to take things for granted. And finally, we absolutely need to see leadership if we are going to go anywhere in the near future. And at the same time, I think it's high time to situate the Cyprus issue, which sometimes we see in an introvert fashion on the island, within a broader regional and global perspective. If you like, take a bird's eye view, go 30,000 feet up and look at the situation, the opportunities it provides, but also the possible challenges the Cyprus issue could face in a region that is so volatile that simply opportunities come and go, and I think we need to be very wary of them. My biggest fear is that process is more important than the result. On a number of occasions we've seen in the past, the process followed for the process, the prioritization of tacticisms versus strategy, and I'm hoping that now we're having a different paradigm in front of us. Still, tacticisms are to be seen on both sides, and these, I would suggest, might not necessarily be able to be the case anymore, simply because things change around us. If we take as a starting point the fact that in principle Turkey would seem to be interested in a solution to the Cyprus issue, then I don't know for how long this will stand. If Turkish-EU relations sour, then perhaps less incentives will be in place for Turkey to continue supporting the Cyprus process in the way it does at the moment. And a distinction that I think needs to be put into place is that, to my mind, President Erdogan seems to be in favor of a solution to the Cyprus issue, seems to wish for a solution to the Cyprus issue. But I remain to be convinced to what extent he is interested in Cyprus as such. So in this regard, perhaps a window of opportunity presents itself. I think the timeframes that I talked about are extremely important in the sense that beyond the political will and the leadership needed or displayed, we have a series of events that will follow now that will make it imperative that a solution be found now. We obviously have the US elections coming up. Vice President Biden and State Secretary Kerry have been devoting a lot of their effort, and I think have been spearheading efforts and developments in the Cyprus issue. They will simply not be in office. And whatever the outcome, a new administration will simply need a few months in order to place people on the jobs, get acquainted with the files. This might be time that we don't necessarily have in the Cyprus issue. That is followed by developments in the United Nations, where the term of office in the UN of the Secretary General is also coming to an end. By that, necessarily the special representative for the Cyprus issue. That is the end of the year. I don't suppose the UN will back off from efforts, but still there will be a time frame in place. Then obviously we have the pre-electional campaign in the Republic of Cyprus that will start in the beginning of 2017, and therefore the local, the domestic, if you like, framework will, in a sense, dictate developments, at least for President Anastasiadis. In northern Cyprus, there is perhaps less of an agreement on certain issues between President Akinci and the government in place. That will also impact the process potentially. And we have other certain developments, like, for instance, the energy factor, which could play in very dramatically in the beginning of 2017 if licenses are handed out and exploratory drillings or seismic drillings take place. In the past, Turkey has reacted to them. It remains to be seen if it would elect to do so in the future, but certainly energy could become yet potentially a friction point until then. So with these and others, I think we're talking about an organic timeline, although one that does not necessarily have to be understood as being in place in the negotiations or accepted by the two parties as a specific roadmap. Until now, there have been obviously a lot of efforts in the past, anything 40 years, certainly since the beginning of the 90s, that Professor Chigas was involved in bringing up confidence-building measures that were designed to bring the two communities together and allow for ground on which to build efforts. But these culminated in the Annan Plan back in 2004 and its failure, as you know. But I think it's this lack of trust between the two communities, the disillusionment and the frustration, if you like, that did not allow the communities to establish cooperative relations between them and capitalize on confidence-building measures. Our suggestion now is then that regardless of the outcome, the two communities desperately need to bridge this gap and come together. If there is a comprehensive solution, it will allow for this solution to find fertile ground on which to root. If hope, against all hope, there is no comprehensive solution, that would still mean that the two communities will continue to coexist on the island, and they need to find ways of cooperating between them towards a mutually prosperous and peaceful future. So effectively, we need to think a little bit outside the box in establishing linkages between the communities that will break the impasses, that will improve negotiations by linking certain issues that would eventually lead to compromise and allow us to achieve interdependencies, increase interaction, and lessen the gap. All that, of course, notwithstanding the fact that in both the Greek and Turkish languages, the word compromise has only a negative connotation. Effectively, we need, in this report, to examine the prospects and the problems of linkage politics in the current negotiations, including the absence of a carrot and stick process that was in place before, in particular with reference to external factors and the European Union. Now we would actually suggest that delinkages with the previous EU context, as the EU's leverage has been compromised, need to be in place and lead to alternative understandings of linkage politics for the groundwork of unification to be in place, or for the ground of cooperation in the absence of a solution to be secure. The current conjuncture, I would suggest, is promising for peace, yes, but is not necessarily auspicious for peace promotion through linkage politics that were effective in the past. I would also suggest that the comprehensive solution discussed is a little bit problematic in the sense that the basis of this is nothing is agreed until everything is agreed. That does not, I think, allow us to capitalize on achievements in one area and build on them, because obviously they're held hostage by areas that have not seen agreement in place. This comprehensive solution also requires, I think, political will and leadership and the acceptance of radical change. However, the situation in Cyprus, as you know, is a little bit too comfortable. So effectively, although I would suggest that political will is to be seen by the two leaders, indeed a lot of goodwill between them, I still have not seen the leadership needed to take a leap of faith forwards, and thus I refer to the previous comment of seeing the process being perpetuated because it is more comfortable to do so. This leads me to a short reference to what the gist of this report is. The gist is that we need to think, as I say, outside the box in establishing linkages between the two communities, but linkages that do not rely on outside actors, but are homegrown. These will, I think, change the parameters of the negotiation, will create new realities and interdependence, and these will not be absolutely or primarily even relying on the political will and decision, but rather create new realities on the ground. So rather than a top-bottom approach, we're talking about a bottom-up approach whereby established linkages between the two communities will create an environment that is more conducive to a solution being negotiated. In this respect, we focus on certain areas by way of suggestion, that is economics and trade, education, tourism, and energy, and environmental degradation and climate change suggestions. You see, what happened, for instance, in the summer with the very unfortunate huge fire in Cyprus that did not see cooperation between the two communities was indicative of sometimes prioritizing political outcomes to even natural disasters. Apart from the fact that this could have been an excellent opportunity for cooperation against a common enemy, it also showed that when the going gets tough, leadership was not necessarily to be seen in place. I know that we're fighting a lot of enemies domestically and internationally. I know that unrealistic expectations have been in place, molding the understanding of publics that are less conducive to opening up to new solutions. In Cyprus, you know, we rarely fight facts. We fight perceptions and ghosts. And this goes back to a whole lot of a discussion regarding the measures to be taken. But the realities remain on the ground. Local realities and international realities that need to be taken into consideration now. I suggest that one of the main reasons for not having voted yes in the last referendum for a lot of people was the perception that the status quo is able to be perpetuated. I would suggest to you that the status quo is not necessarily to be the case from now on. The status quo is, I think, not able to perpetuate for a number of reasons, economic, political, strategic, and others, in a region that obviously changes and is very volatile. I don't suppose the international community's interest should be taken for granted, certainly if there is no solution. But the Cypriots will have to remain on the island and work, live, and coexist together. And I think it's imperative that they find ways between themselves, locally grown realities, to ensure this future. Just to take the example of education. Education in Cyprus is a major area, both in economic and social terms. In the Republic of Cyprus, there are 43 tertiary educational institutions. In northern Cyprus, there are 14 at the moment, bringing in more than €1 billion of income for northern Cyprus, and that accounts for about a third of the budget. So obviously Cyprus has an excellent opportunity of becoming an educational hub in the region. Bear in mind that Cyprus is a country in the region but not of the region, so it could be an excellent opportunity to become a hub in a properly construed EU member state, but with a physical presence in that region. Educational cooperation between the two communities would lead to a lot of progress. I don't think it would undermine the existence of the state. I don't think it implies recognition necessarily, which of course has been a thorn until now. Same with tourism. Tourism, of course, has the potential of contributing majorly to the economies of both that are seriously underperforming. Religious tourism, medical tourism, specific other tourisms and all, could, I think, then the sky is the limit for the two communities. Economy and trade, the same. The chambers of commerce have been extremely productive in thinking extensively in this outside-the-box fashion, but unfortunately have been barred from doing so after a point, given the political realities. The fact remains that the two communities obviously seriously underperform independently, and this is only the area of the economy. In the matter of security, obviously, in that very difficult reason, they will be much better together in facing challenges. In matters of environmental degradation that I mentioned earlier on, it's deplorable that even such major issues have not managed to bring the two communities together. But the gap that has been deepening and widening since 1974, the two communities have grown apart from each other. So in a sense, any solution, indeed a comprehensive solution, would necessarily, to some people, feel an imposed one. So I think it's very important that we grow roots and close in gaps between the two communities, allowing for this process to be much smoother. Indeed, since 1974, if you like, in the physical division between the two communities, they've been taking two different roads. The Greek Cypriot community has become more Hellenized in many respects, education, religion, and all that. Northern Cyprus, or the Turkish Cypriots, have turned more to Turkey. Perhaps one could even argue that Cypriot identity, if you like, was more pronounced back in the 1970s and now is being more diluted. Mutually exclusive narratives have been established on both sides. You know, back in 2004, the highest vote of no in the Greek Cypriot community, at least, was the age group 18 to 25. That is very unfortunate. But now, the last poll we run as PRIO, with the educated youths, only university students, has also indicated that 83% of Greek Cypriot youth have either never crossed to the north or done so once in their lifetime. So obviously it is the young generations that we need to focus on, because they're going to be the ones running the Cyprus issue later on. And the gaps have widened and widened. This is the reason behind trying to find, if you like, ways of bringing the two communities together with bold steps. I know that in Cyprus there's an allergic reaction to perceived external pressure, but still this might need to be the case. So effectively think of ways of linking the two communities together. In the case of a comprehensive solution, obviously this will find fertile ground to root. If there is no comprehensive solution, then obviously we need to devise ways of getting the two communities to live together on the island. You know, I was just sharing with my colleagues yesterday on TV news here, referring to the two candidates. One said that one of them is like a prune juice. It doesn't taste good, but if you don't take it now, you're going to end up with a lot of stools stuck up in the future. The comprehensive solution might be exactly that. It doesn't taste good, but unless you take it now, you're going to end up with a lot of problems. I'll leave it at that and go to the discussion. Thank you, Hocam.
We're going to get wired up, I think.
Yeah,
so
it's there. I think we can do it.
Yeah, no,
There's a person.
there's someone who comes with it.
Perfect.
And maybe you. Yes. Yeah. Thanks. I'll let you. Harry, many thanks for what I would consider a fair reflection of the report. I would very much invite you to have a good look at the report. I know it's very difficult to talk about the Cyprus problem without referring to its history. Harry does, together with Mete, does a great job. Without an appreciation of the history, it's always so difficult to look forward. And without it, it's also so difficult to understand why Harry made that point when he referred that there's little discussion of facts but actual perceptions and the ghost of it. I consider, having started my career in the study of international relations in 1983. From then on, I've always wondered, why is it so difficult to break through that dilemma that Harry has made references to? I think the answer probably lies in this magical word and concept, trust. How to build that trust. Harry made references to a long record of external players, including a professor of mine from Kent University in Canterbury, John Groom, where I did my master's. Way back in the late 70s, he was telling us about his efforts, personal efforts, together with another a professor of mine from City University in London, who many years taught at George Mason University, Chris Mitchell. I always think about them, all that effort, all that energy that has gone into it, and ask myself, why? Why is it so difficult to break through that mistrust? And what I like about Harry's and his colleagues' ideas is this notion of, rather than top to bottom, working from bottom up. Whether that will break through that resistance, time will tell. However, I think we're very lucky to have Diana with us, because she is someone who has had a long career addressing this challenge from elsewhere as well, from the experience in Latin America as well as in Europe. And I can't but ask Diane to reflect on the paper from that perspective, as well as, of course, share with us your thoughts about it going beyond that. Diane.
Thank you, and good morning. I've been working on Cyprus for coming on 25 years, which I think attests to the difficulty that you just talked about, and we see where we are. So I was glad to see the paper come out, because I think it outlines really persuasively and clearly how we need a strategy, a more systematic strategy for getting to yes, that's really reliant and grounded in local interdependence and interests. And for, I think, at least since 2008, but I would probably say before, the international linkage, we've relied on the ties and the motivations, the incentives of the EU to bring the parties to the table and to have them negotiate an agreement. Certainly after 2008, that's become less attractive. I'd say probably even before then, it was very hard for it to provide incentives for both parties. Because for the Greek Cypriots especially, the EU was both a carrot, but it was also the alternative to negotiation, the guarantee of security in case negotiations failed. So it would also serve to entrench some of the hard positions that we saw resulted in what happened in 2004. So we can't rely on that anymore. So we have to come up with a new strategy. And I was glad to see, really concrete suggestions for that shift to local, really developing in a much more systematic way some local interdependence. And I think it's necessary both to reach an agreement, but I think as Harry said, I mean, this is an agreement that will make people will have to live together. So the day after is really important because it will need to be sustained. And it needs some foundations to be sustained, not just to reach a settlement. And so there are a few things, I think, reasons where local linkages will help to address some much deeper issues than just a carrot and stick. And one I think Harry and Kemal just mentioned was just the prevalence of stereotypes, distrust, fear. They have been and continue to be very serious obstacles to an agreement and to further cooperation. And looking at the various polls, at least since I've been around since 1992 working in Cyprus, there hasn't been dramatic improvement. And the parties have been separating even more and more. The quantity of interaction and the quality of interaction has not improved dramatically. I think we expected after the opening of the Green Line in 2003 that somehow magically people would start being in touch with each other and things would improve, and they really haven't. People have said, well, actually the quality in so many ways has decreased. Because it's not as meaningful contact. And I think that should be very troublesome for all of us because people will need to live together. And it's sense that we need some much more systematic, proactive efforts to make some of these linkages happen. They're not going to happen by themselves. The second reason, I think, has to do with the pull factor that Harry also mentioned. In the absence of the EU, what is it? And it's okay to be pushed, and there's not much of a push factor, but what is going to attract people to make some, I think, what are very difficult decisions on the substance? These are not easy decisions that people have to make to actually reach an agreement. And so having some linkages that really give a concrete demonstration of joint gains and how an agreement is not just good for you in rhetoric, but in reality, I think is important. And some of these are very concrete and can provide that kind of a concrete demonstration. Also can help to expand and deepen the constituency for peace. So there's been a lot of bicommunal activity since the 90s. And a lot of these groups have done a lot of really great things. PRIO has continued that tradition and sponsoring a number of these activities. But they're still relatively marginalized. And so really bringing in some more mainstream actors with concrete interests in making an agreement work also expands that constituency and some potential source of pressure on leadership to actually move forward and exercise that political will and leadership that's needed. So second set of issues. I think Harry talked about how the potential is to change the negotiating dynamic. Which has been characterized by very adversarial, zero-sum, loss-oriented mentality, which has dominated it since at least I've been involved. And so I know from experience, and I know there are others in this room who've also worked in Track 2 dialogue, that some of these cooperative activities really do provide an opportunity for people to change relationships and to build some trust, build some understanding, and figure out how to change some of that dynamic to more problem solving. And so that is a potential benefit for the negotiating process. But I think Harry's point about changing some realities on the ground, we've seen this in other situations, going as far back as Israel and Egypt, where a series of preliminary agreements around ceasefires really set the framework and opened people's minds to having a land for peace. Perhaps some of these confidence-building measures could start changing the realities a bit and opening possibilities that previously have been unacceptable. Because now if we continue, the positions are opposed, and it's going to be very difficult to come to an agreement. And so finding some ways of reframing the negotiation will be important. And these can help do that. So lots of great advantages. And so my question is, as I was reading the paper, having gone through several rounds of negotiations of confidence-building measures that have failed, for the same reasons that negotiations have failed, is that they're subject to the same kinds of dynamics. So how do we get from here to there? And that, for me, is the big question. And I do agree with you, Harry, that leadership is really necessary, and this is a time for the leaders who do have goodwill to step up to being more statesmen and to prioritize national interests over domestic political interests and to make some bold moves. But I think there are some deeper issues that, as that happens, need to be at least taken account of a lot. One is that one of the things I think that makes confidence-building measures hard to delink from the broader political dynamic is the fact that they're not only being used as tactics in the negotiation and to gain leverage, which they are and have been, but they do reflect some very deep-seated concerns and fears that both parties have. For the Greek Cypriots, the fear that Turkish Cypriots will take some of these concessions and then become a separate state. For Turkish Cypriots, the fear that this will be just another mechanism for Greek Cypriots to overrun them in negotiations due to the power differential. And so I think one needs to address those fears to make the dynamic work. I think things have loosened a bit. I mean, people are flying in and out of Ercan. People are trading across. The situation's better, so I think there are some openings, but I think those concerns still exist. The other piece is, can the economic interdependence be powerful enough to overcome fears and concerns that are grounded in fears around identity and loss of identity, fears around security, concerns around justice, and that, to me, is a difficult question. The problem has been seen through and framed through the lens of identity and security. And can the concrete overcome those? Will it be powerful enough? I think that's a question. At a minimum, though, I think it does open space to have those discussions. So I think if we can figure out a way of getting around some of these various recognition concerns, it provides a framework in which some of these fears can be explored, which would be good. I think the final two, we talked a lot about domestic, and this has been a very classic from those of us who teach negotiation, kind of a two-level game. You know, everybody's negotiating their domestic with their domestic opposition and then trying to negotiate across the table, and it has constantly made negotiations very difficult. And I agree the leadership needs to be there, but the structure of the situation makes it difficult. And so you have two parties on the Greek Cypriot side, the right and the left, who are pro-solution but are at opposite ends of the spectrum economically, socially, and various other policies. So that makes it difficult for constituents, particularly, and I think you mentioned this in the paper, where people are now starting to put the Cyprus issue as third or fourth in terms of priority. So that's both an opportunity, but also concern, because some of the more nationalist centrist parties that have economic policies or social policies that people might support might gain some support because of that. So I think that's an issue. And certainly in the north, the fact that the president and the government are of different parties, I think makes it difficult and makes the implementation issues really difficult to then think about. So there's some structural pieces around the domestic concerns and politics that I think need to be addressed. And I think finally the push factor. And I agree with Harry that the status quo can't stay. And the question is, how do you persuade people that that's the case? Right. And so, because we've had that before, I think in 2004, Kofi Annan tried to say, this is it, this is the deadline. The EU said Turkish Cypriots will be rewarded, and much of that was not believed and didn't come to pass. So what's the credible push factor? And I think that will be an interesting issue, but I think we need to think about that. And people have started to compare the settlement on the table and the options on the table to the ideal, rather than comparing it to really laying out what are the no settlement consequences, the consequences of not having a settlement, and how do we make those real to people. And there, I think international community can really start to not threaten, but to really help to push a little bit and lay out what are the consequences. And if we could do that a little bit more credibly, that could help the push factor a bit, but also the parties themselves, and to think about really starting to lay that out and having a public and national dialogue around that. I'm not pessimistic yet. I think you said realistic, pragmatic, and optimistic. There has been a lot that has changed in terms of just opening and loosening some potential, even just around how the parties are able to interact. The rigidity of the sort of recognition and the divisions are a little bit looser. So I think there are some opportunities, but it will require some creativity, both on the leaders' part, to figure out how to get around it and addressing some of these issues. So I will end there.
Great.
Pass it on to Andrew.
Many thanks, Diana. This in many ways, Diana's remarks gives us some hope, but at the same time lays out the challenges out there. I just would like to reflect on the push factor very quickly before trying to link it, Andrew, to the role of the US, because I think the two are very much linked. If I ever get interviewed by Amanpour and she sticks the microphone into my face and says, what was the most exciting time in your career as a professor of international relations? I would say the period between 2002 and 2005 maximum. Because here I was at Boğaziçi University teaching courses on international relations, and became involved in a little bit the confidence building, but also in the mobilization, lobbying effort in support of the Annan Plan. And I saw with my own eyes how the position of a player like the one called Turkish state changed, and how the bits and pieces worked and competed with respect to that position evolving. I mean, if protocol permitted, I could literally offer you names of critical players who would have been hardliners, changing their position and also helping to change the position of other hardliners. And that helped me to think of the European Union literally as a magical player, the so-called normative power. That carrot was very critical. I vividly recall Romano Prodi coming to Boğaziçi University to give a talk. He was running late, and outdoors the building was the Turkish Communist Party rank and file, mostly students, yelling slogans that would be very difficult to reconcile with what we always thought was communist thinking and internationalism. He came in. We were very nervous that he would be showered with eggs and tomatoes. That didn't happen. He came out, 450. The place was bursting with people. And he managed to take the tension out of that hall by saying that I will require that protest demonstrations on campuses be part of the Copenhagen political criteria and test a candidate country on that. Suddenly the mood changed in that conference hall. And he said, me as the president of the European Commission, I will, this is 2004 January, I will recommend that Turkey has met the Copenhagen criteria sufficiently and that negotiations should start. But then he qualified it. He said the ultimate decision will come out from the European Council, the Council of Ministers, and those are going to hold the Cyprus card and the support for the Annan Plan. Between that January 2004 and April 2004, there was unbelievable change and political transformation that occurred. So it is possible for entrenched positions to actually change. I saw it with my own eyes, and a lot has been written on it. But then followed a disappointment, Diana, as you just said. And today, I think one of the major architects of this transformation, who's the current president of Turkey, feels utterly betrayed, because those were very critical years there. Here is a political leader who took a massive chance against the establishment, and subsequently the establishment actually tried to close his political party as well. So the failure of the international community to deliver on the promises was very critical there. And that's the context in which, Andrew, I'd like to turn to what Diana and Harry call the push factors. And Harry rightly pointed out this dilemma of external actors facilitating, helping progress, but at the same time engendering resentment and resistance from the part of the local players and actors. And the US has been part of this exercise for a very long time, trying to bring about breakthroughs. And we see that yet another disillusionment may well be around the corner. How do you explain the US's enthusiasm, disappointments, followed by another round of enthusiasm to try to bring? What drives it, and what could we be expecting from the next administration?
I'll do my best with that.
That looked very serious getting up, Andrew.
You asked a lot of serious questions.
Tough exercise.
So, good morning, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests and fellow panelists. Let me start with a thank you to the Brookings Institution for hosting this event, and to Harry Tzimitras and Meta Hattai for their very thought-provoking and valuable report. And of course to Kemal Kirişçi for the invitation to participate in this very important discussion. I can also thank Kemal for his generous introduction and for reminding me of the sins of my youth in the form of the novel. I must begin, as always, with a disclaimer that the views I express today are mine and mine alone, and they do not represent the views of the United States government or the Department of Defense in any way. It's odd because my folder, of course, has my university's insignia on it. I was planning on using a plain folder, but my 5-year-old decided he was going to decorate the house with all the plain folders, so I'm stuck with this one. I have two other equally important disclaimers, though. The first is that I'm a historian, and so it's likely that my analysis will draw heavily on history. Since today's discussion focuses on current issues, I'll endeavor to keep this tendency in check, not least because Cyprus has a long and fascinating history, and I have less than 10 minutes to speak, but also in the hope that any historical references don't generate any controversy along the way. History, after all, as with many issues relating to Cyprus, can be contentious, and today we're concerned predominantly with the present and with the future. Second, I will do my best to avoid some of the more technical details surrounding the Cyprus problem and its proposed solution. This is not my primary area of expertise, and others on this panel and in the audience are far more qualified to comment on those matters than I am. So I've been asked to provide an American perspective on developments in Cyprus towards achieving such a peace agreement and the strategic interests of the United States in the region. My talk has two parts. First, I would like to set the stage a bit from the American perspective regarding the Cypriot peace process. And second, I will outline three of the key strategic impacts on the minds of American policymakers in this region. So for the first time since 2004, Cyprus is again in the news for positive reasons. And I'm sure all of us hope that this will at last be the time that Cyprus can achieve peace and unity through a comprehensive solution to the problems that have plagued it for decades. But this hopeful atmosphere occurs in a context of instability. This is a profoundly challenging time for someone to attempt to articulate American security interests anywhere in the world, let alone in a region as turbulent as the Eastern Mediterranean. If someone was in an uncharitable mood, they might explain this difficulty as a result of the United States lacking a sufficiently robust and clear foreign policy in this region, or in any other, for that matter. Such pessimism aside, it is fair to say that political orthodoxy in this part of the world is in retreat, if not routed. Old certainties, for example, Turkey as a committed NATO partner, Turkey as an aspiring EU member, certainties of predictable, if authoritarian, strongman regimes in the Middle East, certainties of Israel as the only territory in a resource-rich region without natural resources, even the familiarity of hostility with Iran are all unsettled, if not overturned, by recent developments. The new caliphate of the Islamic State, though facing setbacks on the ground in Syria and Iraq, still seems capable of inspiring violence within Western countries to an alarming degree. Millions of refugees have come for shelter in Jordan, Lebanon, and Turkey. Hundreds of thousands more have made the perilous journey to Europe. And they are not the only people on the move. Fighters are transiting to and from the region, raising security concerns in Europe and complicating the prospects for victory over the Islamic State. Amid this transformation, the lack of a solution to reunify Cyprus and end more than 60 years of struggle and instability has remained stubbornly fixed. The last comprehensive solution to political division on Cyprus occurred in 1960 as a result of the Zurich and London agreements. This was a complex solution with many moving parts, negotiated largely without input from Cypriots and based on the involvement of Britain, Greece, and Turkey. It established the Republic of Cyprus, but for all of its intricacies and fail-safe measures, the agreement broke down within just a few years. Solutions and potential solutions that come to Cyprus because of international events, exerting pressure on external actors, are not new. The conclusion of the Second World War forced Britain's hand in offering a constitution, put forward under the name of the post-war governor, Reginald Lord Winster, in 1948. The Suez debacle was quickly followed by the constitutional proposals of Cyril Lord Radcliffe in 1956. The crumbling of the Baghdad Pact, the escalation of intercommunal violence on the island, and domestic politics in Greece and Turkey had a great deal to do with the progress of the Zurich and London agreements. Macro developments and particular internal concerns have often promoted external actors to sweep their differences under the rug and pressure Cypriots to accept a solution. The role of external actors and regional instability represent both a hopeful and a perilous reality. We can be hopeful that these events will serve as catalysts for change, but must remain cautious that change has not always been beneficial for Cyprus. So what sort of change is the United States interested in seeing, and how will the change impact American interests in the region? America finds itself in a position that has similarities to the Procrustean bed that Britain occupied so uncomfortably for many years in the twilight of its empire. Attempts to meet the interest of one partner cause alarm for another. Some parties press for American engagement as useful or even necessary for a solution, while others view it as meddling or even as neo-imperialism. And while the United States does have hopes for Cyprus, it has issues of greater concern both in the region and in the world more generally. Now, this is not to say that Cyprus is unimportant. On the contrary, as I sketched above, Cyprus occupies a very important geographical position, as we all know. Moreover, it is also at the nexus of essential regional relationships that remain critical to American foreign policy. In a word, the United States government hopes that a united Cyprus can, as my father-in-law is fond of saying, contribute positively to the situation in the region. The three most obvious potential positive contributions in a strategic sense are as an energy hub, as a security partner, helping the United States along with the European Union and NATO, and as a basis for putting a definitive period at the end of nearly 2 centuries of Greco-Turkish conflict. For both financial and strategic reasons, the United States would like to see the Eastern Mediterranean energy project become a vibrant reality. Egyptian, Israeli, and Cypriot gas supplying Europe and Turkey, supplementing supplies from the Black Sea and Turkmenistan, would be positive for all the countries concerned. As a friend of mine from the energy business says, happiness is multiple pipelines. Such a cooperation would have the added advantage, from an American perspective, of drawing Israel closer to Europe. It also has the potential to provide lucrative opportunities for American energy and engineering companies. What about as a security partner? Well, recently Cyprus and the United States have begun cooperating more substantively on matters of defense. Joint search and rescue operations exercises just this past summer demonstrate the potential for collaboration. There are opportunities to deepen these ties, and to deepen ties managing migrant flows, combating drug trafficking, money laundering, and dealing with ongoing regional conflicts. The lack of resolution of the Cyprus dispute perpetuates a divide in one of NATO's most vulnerable borders. It gives Russia an opening to play to both Greek and Cypriot security fears, and through this to undermine the alliance. Greece, after all, did withdraw its forces from NATO Joint Command in 1974, imitating the actions of President Charles de Gaulle 8 years earlier. And what about the Greek-Turkish divide? It is in America's interest to see the divide between Greece and Turkey substantively healed. Greece began its revolution against the Ottoman state in 1821. Since Greek independence in 1832, the two states have fought 4 major wars: 1897, 1912 to 1913, 1917 to 1918, and of course 1919 to 1922. The rapprochement achieved by Ataturk and Venizelos during the 1930s was followed by tensions during the Second World War, and then by the familiar crises over Cyprus: the Istanbul pogrom of September 1955, the expulsion of the Greeks of Istanbul in the 1960s, the breakdown of the Cypriot constitution, and of course the events of 1974. Such repeated crises between NATO allies and American partners is not beneficial to American interests. A solution in Cyprus would remove one of the longest-standing and contentious issues dividing Greece and Turkey, paving the way for important mutual gains. Among the most important of these might be the reinvigoration of Turkey's accession process to the European Union, which has been moribund for some time. So rather than the traditional path that we've often heard, in which Turkey supports peace in Cyprus in order to make progress on European accession, a Cypriot peace plan driven by local reasons could pave the way for Turkey and Europe to consider restarting their plans for a partnership. Returning to the theme of making a contribution, the United States does have a positive role to play, whether through financial expertise, outright financial aid, or security cooperation. But the United States also carries negative baggage. Many Greeks have not forgotten America's role in the unpopular military dictatorship which governed Greece between 1967 and 1974. Many Greek Cypriots hold America complicit for the Turkish invasion of 1974. Turkey today has accused the United States of involvement in the events of July 15th and demanded the extradition of Fethullah Gülen. These factors are well known and contribute to the repeated statements that this time, peace talks must be Cypriot-led and Cypriot-owned. And as I actually explained in class last week to some of my students, who, congratulations, they were much sleepier than you were at 10 o'clock in the morning, ownership implies legitimacy. And both ownership and legitimacy imply sustainability. There is no need for more colonial constitutions imposed by external powers. There is no need for additional adult supervision. Cyprus is now part of the European Union and the Eurozone. It should have the power to control its own political destiny for the first time in its history. But with power comes responsibility. And leaders from both the Greek and Turkish Cypriot communities must recognize that achieving a solution means independence from motherlands. I have the word motherlands here in quotes, but from Greece and from Turkey, more than just in rhetoric, but in recognizing their uniqueness as a distinct people. It means freedom from foreign occupation and from foreign guarantees. It means taking unsteady steps into an uncertain future, but doing so together. Such a future holds positive prospects for the United States, the European Union, Greece, Turkey, and above all, for the people of Cyprus. And to close with a final American contribution, there is a quote attributed to John Hancock on the eve of the signing of the Declaration of Independence: "Either we all walk together, or together we must stay where we are.
Very
For a divided Cyprus, the future is undoubtedly brighter together. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Well, before we get into Cyprus, you have just seen why I would like my son to study classic studies and why I would like to go back and start from scratch. Andrew, thanks. Thanks for great remarks. Time has flown by very quickly. I had promised myself that I would allow at least a good half an hour for Q&A. We started a little bit late, so we have just about 20-25 minutes. I will refrain from one round that we traditionally have in the panel, but make one additional point. Not that I want to make the picture even more disappointing. You made references, brilliant references, at the at the beginning of your remarks about political orthodoxy being in flux. I'm afraid one orthodoxy that needs to be included in this picture, particularly in the case of Cyprus, is what's happening with the European integration orthodoxy, which I'm afraid, Andrew, someone weakens the very beautiful line you came up to towards the end with respect to Turkey, EU, and Cyprus, and working our way backward, which brings an additional challenge to the concluding quote that you shared with us. I'd like you to bear that in mind, the panel, you too, Harry, bear in mind that we're going through a time when the attraction of the European Union has not only collapsed for Turkey, but is collapsing internally as well. And the US has a stake in it. The US has had a stake in the European integration project from the end of the Second World War onwards. But let me turn to you. Thank you for your patience. And I think the way we should proceed is I'll take 3 questions first round, turn to the panel, and we'll try to push hard for a second round. I first saw the 2 gentlemen there, and then yourself in the back. I'll come back to you in the second round. Thanks.
Thank you.
Rafi, yes.
Yeah, Rafi Danziger, an advisor to APAC. And my question is, what are the major concrete issues that have prevented an agreement between the 2 sides, and how can the bottoms-up approach actually help resolve those? Thank you.
My name is Barry Jacobs. I was a Foreign Service officer on Cyprus from 1968 to 71. My daughter was born there. I'm a Greek language officer. And I'm surprised when you said that you believe that President Erdogan wants a solution to the Cyprus problem. Nothing I have seen in my study, and no one I have talked to says that that is the case.
Thank you, Peter Milios, American Hellenic Institute. So if a solution is reached, both Turkish and Greek Cypriot leaders will have to lobby their constituencies to pass a referendum on it. And with the surprise results of the Brexit and the Colombian referendum recently, how likely do you believe a referendum will be in being passing on the Cyprus issue?
Thank you. I turn to the panel. One question was directed at me. I'll address it once you've had your chance. Harry, let's start with you.
Sure. Well, basically, it's how to pack. How to pack the Cyprus issue in a minute. I'll start with the shorter question. I said that to me, President Erdogan seems to be, in principle, interested in a solution to the Cyprus issue, but not interested in Cyprus. I think this is a very important distinction in drawing the lines of interest, and if you like, by extension, the incentives behind this. That's why I said that I don't know for how long this will be the case. I can list a number of reasons why he would, in principle, be interested, why he has been, in principle, interested until now. Obviously, Kemal Hocam, you've mentioned the decline of the EU as a carrot and stick, and that I think is particularly pertinent in the case of potential accession of Turkey. But of course, it's a domestic project as well, which would consolidate him as the greatest leader since Atatürk's time in solving one of the national causes. It's an economic one. There's an incentive on energy cooperation. I can go on and on and on. But this is a political project. It's not an ideological one for him. To my mind, I might very well be wrong. That's why I think the incentives need to be understood within a very specific time frame, and I don't know if they will be there for the future. Now, concrete obstacles that have prevented, if I understood correctly, the coming together until now. It can be anything from purely political projects. For instance, the prioritization of re-election interest in the past, even at the expense of the national cause, could be one. It could be a whole gamut of issues up to, for instance, education, whereby since at least 1974, in the physical division of the two, mutually exclusive narratives have been in place. I can talk about the role of religion even in education. I mean, the organized church in place. Now possibly the situation in the north, we'll see how it goes with the religious project, but certainly in the Republic of Cyprus. So it's both a mentality, a political issue. It's a matter of perception to a large extent. It's also a matter of the lack of responsible political leadership, to my mind, in the past. And I think this addresses very much a point that Diana was making earlier on. Responsible political leadership needs to be in place and give an accurate picture to the people of the positives and the negatives. This would address the question of the sustainability or not of the status quo, the positive expected outcomes from a unification, but also the potential negatives from none. And that would address economic, strategic, political, and mentality issues as such. With Brexit, the only thing I want to say is that, yes, Britain has been at the very center of developments. It's also pen holder in the United Nations here. But bear in mind that the very same afternoon of the announcement of the Brexit results, the government of Spain made an announcement that it would need to renegotiate possibly the status of Gibraltar. Bear in mind that Britain is particularly wary of that. In the case of the sovereign bases in Cyprus, obviously these have been secured through the accession agreement to the EU. If there were to be a Brexit, then a new agreement needs to be again negotiated between the Republic of Cyprus in its current or future form and Britain, because obviously the guarantees will not be there if Britain exits. So it's not very straightforward to me what Britain's interests are, not to be taken for granted.
Harry, before I turn to Diana, I think Rafi may have been more interested in the details of something that you have in the report, the actual content of the negotiations. In your report, you do refer to areas where considerable progress has been achieved, but that there are also sticking points, especially under the umbrella that nothing is agreed upon until everything is. I think that's what Rafi was referring to.
I might have misunderstood.
In 1.5 minutes maximum.
In half a minute. There has been a lot of progress in a number of chapters, in particular 4 chapters, having to do with power sharing, with the EU, with economy. There's still thorny issues regarding rotating presidency, matters of property, issues of guarantees, and issues of security. These, I think, are still outstanding issues as such. There has been a lot of progress in the rest of the chapters. I think it's important that you have now 2 leaders that are in principle interested in a solution to the Cyprus issue. They have an excellent rapport between themselves, unprecedented perhaps until now. You've also had a very good constructive involvement of the international community and many states in particular, like the United States, but also the international community through the UN, the IMF, the World Bank, in concrete ways in facilitating the process. And I think the enthusiasm of Espen Barth Eide, that I don't necessarily share personally all of the time, is very important in driving the process forward where it seems to be stuck. Yeah.
I think this is really maybe the richest part of the report, reminding us that we should not chuck the baby with the water out. Out, Diana.
Just a couple of things to build on, Harry. I think in terms of the issues are the same issues that it has gotten stuck on forever. So they're not different. I think what's different is the sophistication of the options and the creativity of the options over the last 20 years has grown tremendously. So that's a really great sign of progress. The thing that makes it stuck, one is after 2008, particularly on the property issue, which is a very zero-sum issue itself. There had been promises, there had been a growing economy beforehand. There were promises of international sort of assistance and support for dealing with the property issue. All that has gone away, so it's made the property issue much more difficult to resolve. So that makes it, and it is one of the key issues. And I think it boils down to people really, there are really difficult trade-offs. I mean, I think we've assumed over time that the personalities, if we got people with goodwill, it would, that's what was needed. And there are some really fundamental substantive differences, and Harry points that out, and Harry meant to point that out in the paper, that really do need to get resolved, and they need to make some decisions about what trade-offs, what's more important and what's less important. And those are really difficult to do. So I think that part I haven't seen very much of yet. I'll comment on the referendum piece. I think there's some lessons to be learned from 2004 on sort of what works and what doesn't in relation to sort of even Brexit and Colombia and how to avoid that. You saw in the North, for a long time, there was a fairly broad movement to inform the public over several years, actually, before the referendum happened, on television, in the newspapers, in small town meetings, in the chambers of commerce, to really sort of explain what the agreement was and what was going to happen, and a good linkage between some of the Track 2 work that was going on that informed how people were saying. And somebody had told me at the time, said, yeah, when people would call in and say, so, you know, what are the Greeks, what's going to happen on property issue or on this issue? And they say, well, I've been talking with Greek Cypriots for the last 3 years, and here's what I know is going to happen. In the South, none of that happened. And the government said, we're in the government, we can do an agreement. And poor Prio was sort of the one that was obligated to sort of publish the agreement. Nobody knew what it was about. And so I think there's an effort to really explain what a complex agreement is going to be and explain what the choices are that needs to happen. And that needs to happen out of the governments. And it needs to happen in a more compelling way than, for example, the government in the Brexit situation did. So there's a piece of that could probably shape the kinds of referenda that happen.
Maybe that's a point, Harry, looking back at it, we could have included in the report.
Correct.
Andrew?
So on the key issues preventing an agreement, as Diana said, that we sort of know what they are because they've been there for a long time. I mean, just to reiterate the fact that the top reason that Greek Cypriots gave for voting against the Annan plan were security concerns. And that's really the primary, more than anything else, because as negotiations progress, again, I'm sort of getting off of my particular area, but as negotiations progress, a lot of what will happen has already been settled. There isn't a whole lot of controversy on issues that have been dealt with in the Annan plan, issues that have been dealt with in negotiation, but security remains the key one. The historical record of the failure of the Annan plan, Annan's report about Cyprus, he actually came out and said, you know, I had to fill in the remaining gaps, the core parts of the plan, particularly those relating to security, on which Greece and Turkey couldn't agree. So those are the issues that remain that are really difficult. I think that the one positive that we deal with today is the fact that Cyprus is now part of the European Union, which it was not before the agreement in 2004. Now that Cyprus is a part of the European Union, some of the security fears, both from Turkish Cypriots in the community in Cyprus and of Greek Cypriots themselves, can be softened by the fact that they are part of the European Union. They are officially, legally part of the European Union. On the question of Erdogan wanting a solution, I would echo what my colleagues have said, and I would just add to it the fact that there are two things about Erdogan, as far as I understand him, that make him interested in a solution. Not, as Harry said, not necessarily interested in Cyprus per se, but interested in a solution. And the first is that he's an extremely practical guy. He likes to get things done. That was what made his political career, was getting things done as the mayor of Istanbul, cleaning up the sea, connecting bridges, rivers, tunnels, all of this sort of thing. So it's something to get done, and that's a positive thing. The second is that he's a businessman. Now again, sort of non-attributable, non-American government. He's a businessman who may like to pocket some of the business that he does, but he's a businessman. He wants to get things done, and he's going to want to, the potential for a Cyprus solution is good business. Because of energy, because of pipelines, because of exploration, because of the business opportunities that will follow from it. And so that's a real tangible incentive. On the point about referendums, yeah, this is a bad season for referendums. I think that I would go to a quote I love from a play, a very famous play, called A Man for All Seasons. I don't know how many of you have ever read the play A Man for All Seasons, but it's about King Henry VIII and his desire to annul his marriage to Catherine of Aragon. And the King Henry's little, his guy who gets all these things done for him says, the king is going to go to Sir Thomas More and ask him about the divorce. And the papal envoy gets very nervous about this. He says, well, he's given his answer. And the little guy says, no, the king will ask him for another answer. This idea that kings, that the powerful interests have a habit of asking you again and again the same question until they get the answer they want, is something we shouldn't discount in the case of Cyprus. I think that the other thing that will play into it is that in the case of the Annan plan, most polls showed that 3/4 of Greek Cypriots were going to reject the plan. It was known that there was opposition for this, and they went ahead with the proposal anyway for complicated reasons that other people can explain better than I can. I think that if this time there is going to be a referendum, if hopefully we get to that stage, it will be in a situation where the result is closer, where it's either too close to call, like Brexit was, or where there will be support in both communities for the referendum, and then it will really be a question of signing on the dotted line.
Time is up, but we are into extra time. I promised you, and then one question here, and I think I'm going to have to call it at that. We're running short of time. Barry, I hope the answers you got on Erdogan were satisfactory, but all I said is that I think he will be remembered for the position he took back in 2003, 2004, took a huge risk, and the risk didn't deliver the fruit. So please. Yeah.
Angle, in the sense that with the pull factor of the EU diminished, some people look at energy, at the natural gas supplies, at the profits to be made, at the chance to sell gas to Turkey and then to Europe through Turkey as a pull factor, a potential pull factor. Do you see the energy discoveries or the potential there as more of a pull factor, or actually as more of a complicating factor due to the issue of Cypriot sovereignty and the right to drill?
Thanks. That's a good question for some publicity for your report. There was one, yes.
Hello, my name is Anıl Çiçek. I'm first counselor at the Turkish embassy. Being a Cypriot myself, I have special interest in Cyprus issue, and I'm in charge of Cyprus issue as well. So my question, I have two short questions, if possible. The first one is, you spoke about the interest of President Erdogan, but you didn't mention anything about the position of the Greek leadership. So, especially given the recent very sharp statements of the Greek Minister of Foreign Affairs, can you share with us your assessments about the position of the Greek leadership? And my second question is about the natural disasters. You said that the natural disasters can be an important instrument for cooperation. Actually, we have seen such a disaster very recently. in the Greek part of the island, there was a very big forest fire, and the Turkish Cypriot side offered help, and finally, at the end of the day, the parties were not able to cooperate even on that natural disaster matter. So how do you think the parties can improve the cooperation in the disaster management?
Thank you. Let me start with Andrew, work our way towards us.
So whether energy is a pull factor or a complicating factor is a great question. And I think the problem with answering it is that it depends on the choices that the political leaders make. It doesn't have to be either a pull factor or a complicating factor. I think that'll be based on the decisions that the leaders make. Hopefully they'll make decisions that allow it to be a pull factor to a solution. I think the other important things to keep in mind with energy factor is that, number one, it's not the only game in town. It's not going to make Cyprus Dubai. There are other energy suppliers. There's Caspian oil, there's TANAP and TAP, there's Turkmenistan natural gas. So it's going to be a part of that factor. I mean, there's gas in Israel, Egypt. So the question for it becoming a pull factor is difficult. I think it's more of a complicating factor for external investors, and that's a challenge because this is not going to happen just with government money, right? This will develop only with the private sector contributing to it, and the private sector is going to be very hesitant to contribute to it as long as political issues are outstanding. To the Turkish gentleman, or Turkish Cypriot gentleman, however you prefer, the position of the Greek leadership, here I will quote a Roman poet from just for Kemal. In the Aeneid, they say that Dido and Aeneas were lovers bound unequally in love. And this has sadly been the experience of Cyprus with relation to Greece since the 1940s. Greece in the 1940s had a civil war. In the 1950s, it was very poor. It was occupied by the Germans, devastated in the Second World War. Cyprus has always been an issue that Greece would just like to solve and get off of its plate because of the conflict that it causes with Turkey. So I think Greek leadership are very open to a solution. They're very open to something that is mutually acceptable to the people of Cyprus, both Greek Cypriot and Turkish Cypriot, and acceptable to the people of Turkey. I mean, that said, there are certain bounds that solution has to be within, but Greeks are, I think in general, the Greek leadership is quite open to a solution because they would really like this problem to go away.
So Ned, I think we have some actually proof that the energy issue has already been a complicating factor, and it goes back to I think my point earlier is that the economic gain, which was clear there. I mean, and certainly those of us who study negotiation theory, yes, it's clear, was not enough to actually overcome some of the regular dynamics. And so I think the leaders need to sort of take some decisions, but whatever it is, to be a pull factor, it needs to sort of pass through, circumvent some of the other political issues around identity security, at least mitigate the concerns that it will either negatively affect what happens in a future negotiation or it won't impact negatively some of these other concerns. And if they can figure out some ways, and many other countries have done this, so it's not that they aren't out there, but some effort needs to be put into that. But unless that happens, I think a lot of these issues, and the natural disasters is another example of the same thing. They could figure out something if it's delinked a little bit from the political and not used as something political, but also those concerns are actually addressed, or at least they figure out a way of putting them aside with some credibility.
Good point. Harry, quickly.
Right, very quickly. From this, I'm not going to say why there was no cooperation. I'm sure there were powerful arguments on both sides for offering and for declining the help. The point is that this reflects an existing mentality which needs to change. And natural disasters, it was the unfortunate fire this time. It could be an environmental consideration later on. It could be a migration question later on. I think that could be an excellent platform for changing the mentality. in tackling it. So I think it was an opportunity lost, although I'm very well aware of the arguments put forward on both sides. I think it could be a reflective point for the future. Hopefully nothing of the sort will happen again. On the issue of Greece, I know that Greece has a lot on its plate at the moment anyway. It has shown to be positively inclined. Frankly, I'm glad it's out of the question, because the more actors you have, the more problems you have. And if you talk to Cypriots, and in particular Greek Cypriots, they will tell you that along the line they have not always been particularly satisfied with Greece's involvement in things. And I'm not only talking about the 1974 events, but eventually economic events dragging down the Cypriot economy and so on and so forth. So I'm sure there are powerful arguments there. I'm glad that Greece is out, having just offered to be constructive and helpful when it comes to it. Hopefully that will be the case with Turkey as well. Net energy, we've been talking about this for years and years. I think Diana is right in her appraisal. To me, the problem with energy has been a lot of lost time, first of all, not only in Cyprus, but in Israel, the same thing, because I would submit to you that it was always political considerations that informed the debate, which means that they were devoid of any business grounding and any economic grounding, and that I think was at the very core of the problem. It was always politics that dictated the decisions, and at that, bad politics at some points. Energy has been allowed to become a chapter, if you like, in the disagreement in principle, because it was the stances of the parties were informed by their position on the Cyprus issue to start with. So we failed to use energy as a platform for reconciliation, hopefully paving the way towards cooperation in other fields as well. I know that this infringes upon the issues of recognition by implication, in principle rights and all, but it's within the framework of trying to think outside the box and trying to find ways of win-win, because physically energy has been the one thing that came up de novo, if you like, since 1974, a new thing that we could build on as a way of cooperation. We failed to do that. Also reflects a mentality that has not changed. And that to me was unfortunate, again, being very well aware of the strong arguments on both sides.
Thank you. Thank you, Harry, and thank you to you all, the panelists. And it's very difficult to come up with uplifting observation on a panel on Cyprus. But my humble lesson is that for us, the outsiders, when we look at a problem like the one on the island, we tend to assume that win-win solutions through energy or through other channels is self-evident, and that the parties to the conflict automatically will fall in line. And clearly this is not the case. Diana made references to two-level games, and it looks like we need to bear that in mind. And at the end of the day, the famous saying, local politics count and domestic politics do in one way or the other get in the way and overcome the logic of win-win. And maybe this is also what's happening right now in the case of the European Union too. But I do consider your participation in today's event as a win-win. And I'd like to thank you once more for being with us. There will be copies of Harry and Mete's report. Please help yourself to it. And thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Diana, for being with us. And thanks for coming over.